Hey guys, you want to take a bet on what is the most commonly told lie in the English language? Ding ding. Sorry, time's up. Most commonly told lie in the English language is "I hate to say I told you so," because everybody loves to say "I told you so." I never knew a single instance or a single person that didn't love to say "I told you, you didn't listen. Look, I'm right." Well, one person who's been having this experience in buckets is President Trump, who over the course of the last several months has been vindicated again and again and again, and all of the things that the news media basically accused him of, slowly, now that it no longer can do any real damage, are being revealed. Let's take a quick look at 5 of them on this article that we're looking at here from Just the News. In reverse order, Trump did not say to the election officials in Georgia, "Find me the votes." He said, "Find the fraud." Trump was right about that one. The Lafayette Park photo myth, where he's holding the Bible and gassed people, gassed protesters so that he could have his photo up. Not true. Didn't happen. Number 3, intelligence community doubts that there were Russian bounties on U.S. troops. Biden basically said it was appalling that he hadn't acted on it. He hadn't acted on it because it didn't happen. He was right about that one too. These next 2 are painful. There is, of course, growing evidence about hydroxychloroquine being effective in treating COVID-19. We knew this a week into the pandemic, and Donald Trump knew it right about that time too. And of course, he was utterly eviscerated for that. And by the way, parenthetically, it does make me wonder how many people actually died, because the media would rather basically not report facts as long as they didn't help Donald Trump. And of course, the top one currently trending is the lab leak reversal. More and more and more stories are starting to come out that, again, matches stuff that we were talking about in March and April of last year, 2020, that this virus almost certainly did come out of the Wuhan lab. I don't want to get into any of the specific guys. I just have a question that I think really is the most important one. As all of this stuff happens, we know what they did with the election and so on and so on and so on. Steve, do you think that anybody is going to learn anything from this? I mean, these are things that they put a lot of chips on, right? And if it slowly becomes known that virtually everything that Donald Trump said was true over the course of, let's say, a few centuries, right? Do you think that any of this will be enough to make people go, well, it was wrong. What they told me was wrong about that. They lied about him. Anybody going to wake up as a result of this cavalcade of mendacity?
Yes and no. I think there are a lot of just regular Americans who, as this stuff trickles out, will just have, a V8 moment about the last 16, 17 months. Oh, my gosh. And that's great. That's really good. We have entered a decadent phase in this once fine republic where our institutions, particularly our media and federal government institutions, are no longer deserving of our trust. And so the quicker the quicker the American people become used to this fact, the quicker we can demand change, and the more likely it is we can get back to some semblance of sanity without something horrible like a civil war or some long simmering widespread violence. This would be preferable to me. The bad part is the people who did this stuff, what they learned is it worked. They got the economy shut down. They got Trump out of office. They have tools. Unlike the American left has tools unprecedented in human history, between the money of Wall Street, the ability of social media to gag, and the now weaponized nature of the federal bureaucracy, which is supposed to be nonpartisan, to attack, suppress, and silence one side. This is unprecedented in our history anyway, certainly in a country this size. It's just never happened like this, and this wealthy too, I should add, however long that lasts. The part that really gets under my skin, Bill, as angry as I am about everything that I just said, is, we're finding out Trump was right all along. We're finding out we were right all along, and that's fine. It's a big, diverse country. We're supposed to have arguments. We're supposed to have debates. But we didn't have that for the last year and a half. We had one side of this argument silenced. We had one side of this argument ridiculed punching down the absolute most ruthless attacks on everyday Americans I've ever seen from the richest and most famous celebrities who love apparently nothing more than attacking the little guy in this country. And I don't even like that phrase, little guy. It just, there's something about that I hate, because we're Americans.
It's like
we're all
the
supposed to be
masses.
equal. But when you have the richest, most famous, and most powerful people in this country using those resources to attack, silence, and ridicule everyday Americans, it is maybe the most shameful thing I've ever seen. And it was widespread. And they didn't learn anything from that except that they can get away with it. And it's going to be up to us to figure out the means to make sure that doesn't happen again.
All of the stories, the individual stories that I mentioned earlier, were, as you say, Donald Trump was ridiculed for all of them. But the real problem is not even the ridicule, Steve. The real problem is that half of the stories aren't even spoken. They're just simply not out there. They just simply squashed. Joe Biden has a son. No, I didn't know that. What's it, Hunter? Is it?
No, the fact that he has a granddaughter,
wonder if he's got a
2-year-old
computer.
granddaughter who he won't even acknowledge. The president of the United States won't acknowledge his own granddaughter publicly.
Okay. Well, Scott, here's my question for you.
Shameful people.
Shameful is right. What this anger on the part of Steve and I and many others is showing more and more as we move into this kind of uncharted waters here is that this really is starting to become clear to everybody that this is not so much Republicans versus Democrats or conservatives versus progressives. It really is a question of the regular people versus the elite. And the reason I set you up for that one is you saw an interview with Jon Stewart on the Stephen Colbert Show. And when Jon Stewart talked about the virus, he talked about at least the possibility that the Wuhan virus may have emerged from the Wuhan virus lab. You mentioned when you told me about this in our backstage show that the audience basically just went along with this and thought, seems pretty obvious. But at the same time, when Jon Stewart said that he came under merciless fire from left-wing elitists who were determined to say, no, Steve, you don't understand. What's the matter with you? You carried this torch for 12 years or something. You can't say he was right. You just can't. But his audience knew he was right. So do you think that that's actually where maybe the wedge of freedom is going to be, is when people on both sides of the political spectrum realize that it's not a question of us disagreeing. We're not allowed to disagree because you guys have already made up your minds.
I think a couple things about this. First of all, if you haven't seen the clip, make sure you check that out on YouTube or whatever streaming service you can find, Jon Stewart with Stephen Colbert. And it's a very funny comedy routine. But the interesting thing about it, and this was pointed out to me by Glenn Beck on his show on the day that we record this show, is how the audience thought it was really funny. And it's the kind of humor that works because it's patently true. It's like a small child saying something honest, about Uncle Joe. Yep. And everybody kind of laughs, even though they don't want to offend Uncle Joe because it's patently obvious. And I don't mean Joe Biden. I'm just saying Uncle Joe is a guy in your family. But anyway, I think there are a couple of things at play here. First of all, I went to school for journalism, and one of the things they say about journalism is that it's the first draft of history. And so they say that to young journalism students to give them a sense of their inflated importance and their role in the fourth estate and in the democracy and public discourse. But if you're a writer, you understand that the first draft of anything is crap. It's junk. It's garbage, and that you have never seen the first draft of anything on the screen. You're not supposed to see the first draft of a book. Most writers would be humiliated. There have been estates of famous dead authors who have fought vigorously to prevent the first drafts of, let's say, Ernest Hemingway or somebody like that from leaking out to the public, because the first draft is not the actual work of the artist or the craftsman. It is that polished, rewritten, researched, carefully vetted piece that finally gets released where the writer can say, I'm confident this is true. Journalists are not doing that. Journalists throw out that first draft, and then we basically chew it up and spit it out. And so at best, you're getting a perspective when you're paying attention to the news. It's always driven by an agenda. After all, who would talk to a journalist unless they had an agenda? If a reporter called you tonight and said, hey, knowing what you know about the media, I was wondering if you'd just spend like 30 minutes spilling your guts to me about a topic of my choosing. And I don't think the average American would want to talk to that journalist. And all of that to say that I think we can get really caught up in this first draft of history and debating it and discussing it and being angry at the people who produce it when these people are clowns and they don't deserve the time of day. Nobody knew exactly where that virus came from. So anybody who was advancing a theory about it should be treated as somebody who had a theory about it until they were able to track it and trace it. There are reasonable theories, though. And a reasonable theory is, as Jon Stewart pointed out, that a Wuhan virus might have emerged from a laboratory called the Wuhan Virology Laboratory. It's not an unreasonable thought. And so if you mock somebody who proposes that idea, then I think you're going to beclown yourself. And so I think that the best thing that we can do as citizens who absorb this news is to do our own research, to read multiple sources, to study contrasting opinions, and to draw our own conclusions based on that evolving data set that becomes more apparent over the years. I'm sure that if Jefferson and Washington and Madison and Hamilton read some of the history books of the writing of the Constitution that I've read over the last couple of years, that they'd have a lot of problems with them because that's not how they saw it at the time. And I think we need to realize that going forward, we're going to see things differently over time as well.
Well, that's beautifully said. And the first draft of history is really the issue. Parenthetically, I did get to see the first draft of Hemingway's called Farewell to Arms. And it's a story of the Spanish-American War as told through the eyes of a talking dog. And as it turned out, he decided to kind of take that down a little bit and make it a little more centered.
Hemingway and a talking dog.
It's just what Hollywood would do to that story. Yeah. I swear to God, if they made that movie today, they'd put a talking dog. I made myself laugh. Here's the thing, though, folks. Here's the thing about Scott's point, and Scott's point is absolutely right. It's the first draft of history, but unfortunately, in the age we live in, the first draft of history is available to the entire planet immediately, and before a second draft of history can be issued, there's another first draft of some other new history. There never gets to be a second draft. We never get to see the after the facts. We never get to see, well, after 7 weeks of research, we discover that. No, just boom, they make their decisions and out it goes. And there's no retraction that has ever in history that I'm aware of come anything close to the size and the scale of the slander or the error that was committed in the first place. This is what we have. We have a system that is out there that is committing egregious errors, both intentional and unintentional, and no method of correcting them. As I look at this website, by the way, where I saw the story about the 5 things that Trump was found to have been correct about, I see on the sidebar, just as a sort of target of opportunity, 2 links that I'm not going to click. One of them is Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger opens probe on missing documents for absentee ballots. So Secretary of State Raffensperger is going to look into some of these allegations about Georgia's voting record. We saw Maricopa County in Arizona have the officials of the election there say, all of our records just accidentally got deleted. Sorry about that. They're just gone. These things happen. And the other one, the heartbreaking one, the one that is the most unforgivable for me, and I think the one thing that history will not ever forgive, is this one that I see here too. Did anti-Trump bias blind science to evidence for the COVID lab leak theory? No, science was not blinded by anti-Trump bias. Scientists were blinded by anti-Trump bias, and science, as it is designed, is there to bleach out those biases. If you allow science to do its job, which is slowly happening despite the best efforts of our insect overlords, what you find is, no, the truth will actually come out eventually, now that it's too late to really have any difference. I personally think that if Jon Stewart recognizes this, and this kind of thing continues at this rate, I don't see how anybody will not be faced with, at the very least, an increase in volume of the cognitive dissonance that you have to endure when you're a left-winger all the time. The lab one especially, they put all their chips on the table here. If it turns out that the virus came from the lab, and the virus did come from the lab, because I've looked at the research on where that virus came from and how SARS-1 and MERS spread, and it's nothing like this one. When these things happen, even the left has got to start losing confidence in their own mechanisms of propaganda. And Jon
Stewart.
Thank you. Jon Stewart's reaction to the Stephen Colbert interview shows me that there may be some cracks in the dam of the damned visible, starting to show already. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. This show's made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com. Love to have you join the team and give us some ammunition for the next round, which you will see next week right here on Right Angle.